The Nevada sun beat down with no mercy. Dust rose from the earth in shimmering waves, and the desert stretched endless and quiet, like it was holding its breath. Luke Mallory rode alone. He wasn't a man fond of talk, nor one to look for trouble. The land had taught him to live slow, live quiet, and expect nothing from a world that had already taken too much. But that morning something changed. He'd been driving his cattle along the southern ridge, not far from Dead Horse Gulch, when he saw it. A flash of silver, just off the trail. At first he thought it was sunlight on a rock, but it wasn't. It was a medallion, glinting in the sand, hung from the neck of a girl tied to a wooden cross. Her face burned, lips cracked, eyes half shut. She looked barely alive, clothes torn and faded, wrists bruised, bound tightly with old rope. The cross itself had been forced upright in the earth like some twisted message, left out in the open, far from any water or shade. Luke jumped down from his horse in one motion. No hesitation, no question, just action. He cut the ropes with his hunting knife, lowered her gently to the ground. Her body was limp, too light. He poured a few drops of water between her lips, watched as her eyelids fluttered. A whisper, not even a word, just breath and sound, but she was alive. He wrapped her in his blanket, lifted her onto his horse, and turned back toward his ranch without ever looking behind him. He didn't know who she was, or who had done this, or what that silver medallion meant, but deep down he knew this wasn't random. Back at the ranch, he laid her in the small spare room of his cabin and called for Mary Fletcher, the only woman in 5 counties who knew more about healing than any doctor in town. "She was left to die," Mary whispered, brushing dust from the girl's cheeks. "But she didn't," Luke said. "And until she tells me why, she stays here." That night, long after the desert cooled and the wind picked up over the plains, Luke sat at the edge of her bed, holding the silver medallion in his hand. It had a symbol etched on it, something he couldn't read, not a name, not a cross, something older, something that made the hair on his neck stand up. He didn't know her story, but something told him it was about to change his life. She woke on the 3rd morning. Luke had just finished splitting firewood when he heard Mary call from the back room. He rushed inside, boots thudding on the floorboards, heart pounding like he hadn't felt in years. The girl, barely more than a woman, was propped up on pillows, her cheeks still pale but her lips no longer cracked. Her eyes, when they opened, were a shade of gray he'd never seen before, like storm clouds over desert stone. She looked at him, not with fear, not even confusion, just silence, and a weariness that came from more than just heat and rope. Mary leaned in gently. "Do you remember your name, sweetheart?" The girl blinked once, her lips moved. "Ada." Her voice was soft, scratchy, but sure. "Ada," Mary repeated with a kind smile. "That's a strong name." Luke watched her closely. He had questions, too many to count, but he held them back. Pressing wouldn't help. He knew that kind of quiet. It came from people who'd seen too much too fast. Instead, he reached into his pocket and held out the silver medallion. "This was around your neck." Ada stared at it, unmoving. Then she flinched, just slightly, enough for Luke to see she knew exactly what it was. "You don't have to talk about it now," he said, voice low. "You're safe here. No one knows you're here. Not yet." Ada's hands trembled. She closed her fingers around the medallion slowly, like it might bite. Then she said 3 words that chilled Luke to the bone. "They'll come back." That night, Luke sat by the fire, staring at the symbol again. It wasn't just the shape that troubled him. It was the feeling. He'd seen something like it once before, years ago, etched into the side of a wagon burned outside Fallon. A raid no one ever claimed. A mystery that was buried with the ashes. But now, it was sitting in his home, breathing, speaking, and wearing a name. Ada. He didn't know what brought her to that cross. But something told him what came next would be even more dangerous. Luke rose early, before even the crows stirred in the cottonwoods. He didn't sleep much since Ada came. Not from fear, but from a pressure he couldn't name. A feeling that something was watching the horizon. He saddled up without a word and rode out toward where he found her. Back to that scorched spot in the desert where the wood cross still stood like a broken tooth in the ground. It was undisturbed, but the tracks weren't. Someone had circled the area after him. Fresh hoofprints, wide and heavy. 3 riders, maybe 4, keeping a wide distance as if scouting. They weren't just looking for Ada. They were hunting her. Back at the cabin, Ada stood on shaky legs, leaning against the doorframe, blanket draped around her shoulders. The silver medallion now hung tight against her collarbone again. Luke dismounted, tossing his reins, his eyes meeting hers. "You remember anything more?" Ada hesitated, then slowly nodded. "They call themselves the Chain," Luke blinked. What? It's not a name you see on wanted posters, she said. It's older than that. Older than most ranch maps in Nevada. Luke stepped onto the porch. Go on. Ada's fingers clenched the railing. They buy and trade secrets. People. Families. They move in shadows, ruin what's honest, and erase what they leave behind. I was born into it, but I ran to it. She looked up at him, eyes harder than before. They don't let anyone leave. Luke took a breath, feeling the weight of it settle into his chest. This wasn't just a family dispute, not some outlaw mess in a far corner of the county. This was deep, connected, and dangerous. That evening, while Ada rested, Luke rode into town, Fallon, a place with creaky saloons and suspicious eyes. He paid a quiet visit to Elias Boone, a half-retired tracker who once worked bounty papers out of Salt Lake. Boone looked at the medallion and let out a low whistle. I've seen this mark before, he said, but only in bodies, never in survivors. Luke's jaw clenched. So it's real. Real enough that most folks pretend it ain't. Boone leaned closer, lowering his voice. If you're keeping that girl on your land, Mallory, you'd best get ready, because when the chain comes knocking, they don't ask, and they don't leave. Luke rode back under moonlight, his mind filled with dust and warnings. And yet, when he stepped into the cabin and saw Ada asleep by the fire, arms wrapped around herself like a child, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to hand her over. Not now, not ever. The next morning, Ada woke to the sound of hammering. Through the open door, she saw Luke reinforcing the barn doors, driving iron nails deeper into thick oak. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, dust on his boots, jaw set with a kind of focus that didn't ask for questions. He was preparing for something. Preparing for them. I don't want you getting dragged into this, she said later when he came in for water. Luke set the tin cup down on the table. Too late for that. Ada's gaze dropped. You don't even know me. He shook his head slowly. I know the kind of people who'd leave a woman tied to a cross like she's some warning to the wind. And I know I don't walk away from that. She stared at him, eyes a little too shiny. No one's ever stood between me and danger before. He looked up. Then they'd been standing in the wrong places. That night, Luke lit a fire in the hearth. Ada sat across from him in the old rocking chair, a blanket over her knees. Her color was coming back, her voice too. But she hadn't smiled yet, not once. She turned the medallion over in her hands, thumbing the strange symbol again and again. Luke watched the way she moved, cautious, but never weak. Does it mean something to you? He asked. Ada nodded. It was my mother's. She died when I was 10. The chain took her. Said she owed too much. This was all I kept when I ran. Luke leaned forward. And your father? Her fingers tensed. He stayed with them. Silence. Then, he's the reason they keep looking. Luke didn't speak for a long while. Then, with eyes low and voice quiet, he said, We all come from something broken, Ada. But it doesn't mean we have to carry the pieces forever. That night, before they turned in, Luke left a loaded rifle leaning by the cabin door, just in case. Ada noticed it, and for the first time since she arrived, she walked over and checked the chamber like she'd done it 100 times before. Luke raised a brow. She glanced back. They taught me a lot of things, she said bitterly, but they forgot one. What's that? How to stay afraid. As the fire died down, Ada sat near it, warm for the first time in weeks. She looked over her shoulder. Luke? Yeah? If they come back, I'll be here. You don't even know what they're capable of. He met her eyes. Then let them find out what I'm capable of. And in the silence that followed, surrounded by shadows and embers, a promise was made. Not spoken, but known. A week passed. Ada grew stronger. She walked with more certainty, ate with more appetite, and even started helping around the ranch. Luke watched her move like someone used to watching over her shoulder, but learning, slowly, how to lower her guard. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready for, but every day he learned more through the quiet, how she tensed at the sound of distant hooves, how she touched the scar on her wrist without realizing, how she stood still too long at dusk, like waiting for something to rise from the shadows. Then came the letter. No stamp, no return address, just a folded note, nailed to his gatepost. She's marked. Return what's ours or we come take it back. Luke stood over it, jaw tight, hands still. He burned the note in the hearth that night without saying a word. Ada saw the flames flicker higher but didn't ask. She didn't need to, because she knew they'd found her again. I should run, she whispered later, sitting beside him. Luke didn't look at her. You run, they win. She exhaled, bitter. If you get killed for protecting me, they still win. He finally turned to face her. I've lost things before, Ada. A brother, a piece of myself in that war. I'm not about to lose this, just because someone thinks fear still works out here. She blinked. This? You. 2 days later, the first sign came. Tracks, fresh and deliberate, circled the back fence line. Luke found a cigar butt crushed into the dirt near the water trough. Someone had been watching. Close. He didn't ride into town, didn't run to the sheriff. He knew better. Whatever this was, it was older than law and far past justice. That night, he saddled both horses. Ada raised an eyebrow. You taking me somewhere? No, Luke said, handing her the reins. We're going somewhere together. Where? Into the hills. There's a cabin I built years back. Quiet. Hard to reach. No one knows it but me. Ada stared at him, cautious. What if they follow? Then they'll learn the land can bite harder than they do. As they rode out under the cover of dusk, wind howling softly through the brush, Ada glanced back at the fading outline of the ranch. She didn't speak until they crested the ridge. Then softly, most men would have handed me over. Luke replied without turning. Then I'm not most men. Far below them, in the darkening desert, 4 riders crossed into the valley, dressed in black, armed, and hunting a girl with a silver medallion who wasn't running anymore. The air in the hills was different. Cooler, thinner, and quiet in a way the lowlands never were, like even the wind had to tread lightly up there. Luke's hidden cabin sat tucked between 2 rocky rises shielded by thick pines. Built years ago with his own hands during a season of grief, it had stood empty ever since. Until now. Ada stepped inside first. Dust motes drifted in slanted beams of light, and old wool blankets still hung over the windows where Luke had left them. She ran her fingers along the shelf by the hearth, eyes scanning the space. It was small but safe. Safe had become a rare kind of luxury. You built all this? She asked as Luke unloaded supplies from the saddle. After the war, he said. I didn't want to be found for a long time. And now? He looked at her steadily. Now I do. Ada looked away, heart thudding harder than she wanted to admit. They spent the day repairing the roof and stacking wood. Ada helped wherever she could, though her body still hadn't fully recovered. But her hands were steady now, and her eyes more alive than Luke had ever seen. At sundown, they shared a meal by the fire, rabbit and beans. Simple, quiet. You think they'll come here? She asked. Luke stirred the coals with a poker. They'll try. She nodded slowly, staring into the flames. Then I want to be ready. That night, Ada didn't sleep in the spare cot. She sat beside the fire until it burned low, the medallion gleaming at her throat like a sliver of moonlight. When Luke stirred, she was already looking at him. There's something you don't know, she said quietly, about the medallion. He sat up, boots still on. I figured. It's not just a family heirloom, it's a map. Luke blinked. To what? To a ledger. Names, locations, amounts. Everyone who's ever worked with the chain, bought from them, paid them off, or helped them disappear people. My mother wrote it before they killed her. Ada's hands trembled as she clutched the pendant. She etched the coordinates into this. It's all that's left of the proof, and they know I have it. Luke stood slowly. You saying if that medallion gets into the right hands, this whole thing burns down? Yes, Ada said. And they'll do anything to stop that from happening. Outside, the wind picked up. Far down the trail, beyond sight, the soft crack of a broken twig echoed through the trees. Luke reached for his rifle without a word. They were no longer just hiding. They were holding the fuse to a secret that could bring a kingdom of shadows to its knees. And both of them knew the chain was getting closer. The first shot came at dawn. Not loud, not close. Just far enough to make the birds scatter and Luke's head snap up from the fire pit. He'd been watching the tree line since before sunrise, rifle across his lap, eyes never far from Ada, who now stood barefoot in the cabin's doorway holding her breath. They're here, she said. Luke didn't nod. He didn't have to. By mid-morning, they spotted 3 riders. Black coats, wide hats, rifles slung low, moving slow, deliberate. Scouting! Luke crouched beside the edge of the cabin with his spyglass, tracking their positions. He knew how these types worked. They didn't storm in. They waited, spread fear, choked off escape routes. But what they didn't know, this wasn't just some cabin. This was a trap they'd just walked into. You sure about this? Ada asked. She stood beside the cellar hatch, where Luke had just laid out dynamite charges, small ones, old mining supplies he'd never had a use for, until now. Luke gave her a half smile. I was sure the second you said they kill without asking. She nodded, then handed him the medallion. Bury this, somewhere not even I know. If they get through, they won't. But if they do, he wrapped the chain around his fist. I'll protect it like it's you. That night, the forest went quiet. No crickets, no wind, just the stillness that comes before something bad. Luke stayed on watch. So did Ada. No longer just a girl who'd been chained to a cross, but a woman who'd decided she would never be helpless again. Just past midnight, the first attacker stepped into the clearing. Luke didn't shout. He didn't fire. He waited. Let the man come close, then trip the wire. The blast was small, but enough to shake the pine needles off every branch. Screams, chaos. The other two men dove for cover, but now they knew. This wasn't a rescue. This was a war. Ada held her own. She stayed behind his cabin wall, took out one rider's horse with a clean shot to the knee. The man rolled into the dirt, screaming, gun clattering out of reach. Another circled wide, tried to flank. Luke met him halfway, fist to jaw, elbow to chest. When the smoke cleared, only one man remained standing. And it wasn't from the chain. Silence again. Then Ada stepped from the shadows, hair wild, eyes hard. We're not running anymore. Luke nodded slowly, wiping blood from his knuckles. Good, he said, because I'm done letting shadows chase the good out of this land. Together, they dragged the survivors into the shed and bound them tight. The wounded one kept muttering, "It's not over. She carries the key. You don't know who you're crossing." Ada knelt beside him, voice calm but cold. "I do now, and I'm coming for them." That night, she didn't just sleep in the cabin. She didn't just stay by the fire. She laid her head on Luke's shoulder and whispered the words neither of them had dared say before. "Thank you for choosing me when you didn't have to." And Luke, holding her close in a world that had nearly broken them both, said quietly, "I think I was meant to." At sunrise, the air tasted like victory. But neither Luke nor Ada let themselves celebrate. They knew better. 3 men in the hills weren't the whole chain. They were scouts, pawns, sent to rattle the cage. What came next would be larger, heavier, the kind of thing you didn't wait for. You moved before it found you. Ada stood at the cabin table, hands flat on a map of northern Nevada, tracing the ridge lines with a piece of charcoal. "If this symbol," she said, tapping the medallion, "marks where the ledger is buried, then we're less than a day's ride from it. The Split-Tooth Gorge." Luke leaned in. "You sure?" She looked at him. "I spent 10 years pretending I didn't know. I'm done pretending." They packed light. 2 rifles, 1 satchel of water and jerky, and the medallion secured under Ada's blouse. Luke left behind a note with Boone and Fallon, in case they didn't return. "If this gets to you, ride for Sheriff Maddox. Show him the medallion. Show him everything." Then they rode east. By dusk, the canyons rose like rusted bones out of the sand, split-toothed, jagged and narrow, forgotten by most men. But Ada remembered. "It was the first place I saw my mother cry," she said quietly, dismounting, right before she hid the ledger. They found the outcrop within the hour. Luke dug while Ada stood watch, hands never far from the rifle on her back. Then, beneath the loose stone, a rusted tin box wrapped in oilskin. Inside, a leather-bound ledger, pages brittle but clear. Names, amounts, towns, judges, bankers, traders, all tied to the chain. Luke whistled low. "This is the kind of thing that could burn half the county down." Ada looked at him. "And rebuild the other half." They didn't hear the riders until it was almost too late. Dust kicked up. 6 men on horseback, black dusters, guns drawn. Luke shoved the ledger into Ada's pack. "Run south through the rocks. Stay low." "I'm not leaving you." He grabbed her shoulders. "This isn't leaving. This is finishing what your mother started." Then he turned, rifle ready. The ambush was fast. Shots cracked through the canyon. Luke dropped 1 man at the edge of the bluff. Another lunged from the saddle, knife raised, only to meet Ada's boot to the ribs from behind. They fought back to back, outnumbered but not outmatched. Together they moved like water, fluid, focused. When the smoke cleared, 3 were down. 2 rode off. 1 remained, a tall man with a scar running from temple to jaw. He didn't raise a weapon, just smiled. "Didn't think the girl had teeth," he said. "But it don't matter. You're both dead anyway. This thing goes deeper than you can ride." Ada raised her rifle. "Then we'll dig deeper." She fired. The man dropped. No more warnings, no more messages, just resolve. That night, they camped under the stars with the ledger beside them and ash on their boots. Ada looked at Luke across the fire. "You think we'll make it out of this?" Luke reached for her hand. "We already did, because love wasn't just shelter. It was the courage to stand and say no more." And that courage, like the truth, was finally in their hands. The next morning, they rode with the sun behind them and the ledger tied beneath Ada's saddle. Every page felt like a matchbox, every name a fuse just waiting to be lit. They didn't go back to the cabin. They didn't go to Fallon. They rode straight to Prospect Junction, a mining town turned frontier seat of power, where judges wore clean boots and criminals wore clean suits. It was where the big names in the ledger lived, and it was time the truth came knocking. Luke and Ada arrived covered in dust, their faces unreadable, their posture steel. They went first to Sheriff Maddox, a man with weathered hands and a slow drawl, but eyes that hadn't dulled yet. He read the ledger in silence. His mouth tightened. Then he looked up. "You two know what this means, right?" Ada nodded. It means we burn it down. Maddox didn't argue. Instead, he stood, pulled his tin star off his chest, and placed it on the desk. Then I'm in. By sundown, Maddox had rounded up 2 deputies he trusted. Luke pulled in Boone and 3 ranchers who owed him more than favors. Ada made her way to the local printer's shop, heart racing. There she stood with trembling hands and said, "Print 5 copies. Don't ask questions. Just do it fast." The old printer, seeing the look in her eyes, simply nodded. The plan was fast, clean, public. At high noon the next day, while Judge Braxton, the highest name in Ada's ledger, was eating stew in his favorite saloon, Sheriff Maddox strode in and dropped a printed copy of the ledger on his table. All conversation stopped. The judge paled. "Where did you get this?" "From a girl you tied to a cross." Braxton stood trembling. "You have no idea what you've done." Maddox raised his voice. "You thought no one would ever dig deep enough. But the land remembers, and so do the people you tried to bury." That day, 5 arrests were made. 2 others fled town before sundown, and the name Ada spread faster than wildfire across the county, not as a ghost, but as a woman who refused to die for silence. Back at the edge of town, Luke waited outside the saloon. He looked up as Ada approached, the last copy of the ledger in her arms. "It's done," she said, breathing slow. "They're finished." Luke didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just opened his arms, and she stepped into them. For the first time, there was no dust between them, no guns nearby, no shadows waiting, just the quiet after the storm. "You know," Ada said softly, "I think I'm finally ready to live again." Luke tilted his hat back. "You were never meant to just survive, Ada." She looked up at him, finally smiling. "I know. I was meant to ride beside someone who never let go of my hand." Spring came late that year. Snow lingered on the ridgelines longer than usual, and the high plains turned green slower than they had in seasons past. But something new took root in that time. Not just in the land, but in 2 people who had finally outrun the past and stopped looking over their shoulders. Ada didn't leave Nevada, not because she couldn't, not because she was afraid, but because, for the first time since she could remember, she didn't want to run. The cabin in the hills was rebuilt, stronger, warmer. Luke carved new beams, cut fresh shingles. Ada stitched curtains from salvaged cloth and planted seeds near the porch. A real garden. Together they built something neither had dared dream of. A life. She kept the medallion, but wore it inside her blouse now. The ledger? Sheriff Maddox had locked the original in the courthouse vault. The copies had been sent to Carson City, Salt Lake, and beyond. The chain? Disbanded, scattered, hunted now. There would always be shadows out there, but the truth had taken root, and light once lit was hard to put out. One evening, as the fire crackled and dusk painted the sky gold, Luke stood behind Ada on the porch. "You ever think about leaving all this?" he asked. Ada leaned into him. "I already did, and I came back." Luke chuckled softly. "You know," she said, tilting her head back, "there's still something we never talked about." "What's that?" "My last name." Luke raised a brow. "You hiding another secret on me?" "No," she said, smiling. "I want a new one." She turned, eyes steady on his. "If you'll give me yours." He didn't say anything at first, just stepped forward, lifted her hand, and kissed the inside of her wrist, right where the old rope scars had faded. Then he said, "You already carry everything I've got. Might as well take the name, too." They married that spring. No preacher, no guests, just pine trees and wind, a pair of silver bands traded under the Nevada sky, and a single promise whispered between them. Never leave each other chained again. Years passed. Travelers would sometimes stop at the ranch high in the pines asking for help, shelter, or a story. And if they stayed long enough, they'd hear about the girl who was left to die, and the cowboy with no past who gave her more than freedom. He gave her roots. She gave him a reason. Together they built a home,